Thank you for joining us again on another episode of Rebuilding the Black Family. Thank you for joining us. We're thrilled by those of you who are checking out our podcast every week, subscribing and liking and passing on and sharing it with your family, your loved ones, your friends, your co-workers. Thank you very much. You're helping us to get the message of rebuilding the Black family across this region, across Canada, and also around the world. So again, thank you very much. Today we have an exciting program. We're going to talk about the history of Black resistance to racism, oppression, specifically in Canada. Now, there's something a quote I want to speak to you or share with you. It was by Dr. Martin Luther King. He said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're caught in an inexplicable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." So we're going to be discussing this subject of resistance or Black resistance to racism, oppression in Canada with our in-house expert, Mr. David Grant.
Brother Karl, you're kind with the words. Expert. I want to make it clear to the audience. I'm not a historian. My expertise is certainly in mental health. And of course the psyche of people. But because of my passion, because of my love for understanding the condition of African people, I do dabble in understanding and reading and becoming learned in the antecedents of what we have in our present day in terms of why we as Black people are so strong as it pertains to resisting against racism and how we came to be.
So let's start by saying or asking this, David, if you don't mind. What has been the Black people's history of resistance against racism, or I like to call it racism or oppression, in Canada?
Excellent.
Give us somewhat of an overview.
Excellent. So I want, first and foremost, people to understand that Black people have a over 400 year history of resisting against racism. This was not something that happened yesterday or even 10 years ago. Since the inception of enslavement in Canada, since the first Black man, Olivier Lejeune, was taken into Canada, he was actually served as an interpreter and a negotiator between the Indigenous peoples here as well as the Europeans. Yep. He also was, from what I understand, enslaved as well, right? For a period of time. So resistance has happened since the beginning of time. So I want to give a couple examples just to show in the different epochs of our life here in Canada what that resistance has looked like. So we can look, for instance, just during enslavement in general, which enslavement in Canada began in 1619, was abolished by the Crown, by the British, in 1834. We as African people, we knew that there was nothing pleasant about slavery. There was nothing pleasant about slavery in Canada, despite the fact that we did not have the same plantation system as our American counterparts or the Caribbean or South America. Slavery here was diabolical. We were treated as subhuman, right? We were codified by law. Our humanity was codified by law. We were not considered human beings. We were considered real estate if we really think about it.
Exactly.
And because African people understood that from the very beginning, we ran away. We defied our slave masters. We defied, white patrons in the community. We defied it right from the beginning. There's, people can take Google searches and there's images, like historical images of ads, wanted ads of enslaved African people who fled from their slave masters. And it'll describe, it will say wench, which is what they used to call Black women. Bed wench, 33, their height, weight, whatever. This Negro, this is what they used to call us. This Negro was seen last in this respective area. Her master is, whichever the name. So it goes to show this is how we were treated. And the fact that there's wanted posters for us, that means we were resisting. That means we were running away. We are under the impression that Canada was nothing more than a safe haven from our refugee counterparts in the States.
Narrative.
That's the narrative. Sometimes, actually, it was the reverse. That Canada, we actually fled sometimes to the States, to free areas in the States. People don't know that. there's some enslaved African people who fled from Canada. So from what used to be known as Upper Canada, we fled from there, for instance, from our wretched slave masters to free places in the States like Vermont, right? People don't know about that. We keep hear about the reverse. But we resisted there. We travel now, even during slavery, but now in the latter half, for instance, there's the first race riots in North America. Shelburne race riots, which Shelburne is a town in Nova Scotia, and that was the first race riots, and it actually wasn't started by us. It was started by the white loyalists who were disgruntled with enslaved African people being self-sufficient.
And when was that?
This was in 1784.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for reminding me of the date. 1784, white loyalists decided to mob a black preacher who decided he was going to preach the gospel even to white congregants, whether they liked it or not. And they decided to run enslaved Africa, or I should say free. Some of them were free black people out of their respective town. They beat us. They destroyed our properties. They ran us out of the town. It was a race riot, but it was actually incited by white disgruntled loyalists, and the loyalists were the people who fought for the British. Yeah. So we fast forward now, we can even go to the early 1900s. So we're just out of slavery, 1834. Let's go to 1914. Well, let's go to the prairies, right? We go to Alberta, specifically in Edmonton. Charles Daniels, if I'm not mistaken, 1914. A black man. He's so-called free. Right? We have to remember, he was so-called free, but he was not equal. He decides he wants to go to a movie theater. He's refused entry simply because he's black. So for people who say there was no systemic racism, how on earth could there be no systemic racism, yet he was denied entry into a movie theater because he was black? He said, I'm not going to tolerate that. I'm going to resist. And he decided, I'm going to go in anyway. They threw him out. And he decided to sue them. He lost, but he resisted. Fast forward, 8 years later, 1922, Lulu Anderson, same town, Edmonton. Went into a movie theater and decided, I'm going to go into this movie theater, whether you guys like it or not. Thrown out and now assaulted. They assaulted one of our sisters just because she wanted to be treated like a human being and go and watch a movie. In Edmonton, Alberta. And she sued. Lost again, but she resisted. We keep talking about Rosa Parks, Viola Desmond, and Viola Desmond being the Rosa Parks of Canada. It was the reverse. Viola Desmond's lawsuit against the movie theater in New Glasgow actually preceded Rosa Parks' resistance on the bus. Viola Desmond didn't want to sit in the balcony. Neither did Carrie M. Bess, who also around the same time resisted. And they were kicked out of the movie theater simply because they wanted to sit on the floor and have a better view. We fast forward now even to the present, the 60s, right? And I'm almost saying that because I want to show the history of black resistance. We come to the 60s. Did you know that there was a Black Panther chapter in Montreal? Right? And it came about around the time of the George William Affair incident or uprising, i.e. known as the Computer Center riot, which was at what used to be known as George Affair University, which is now known as Concordia University. Several black students deemed one of their biology teachers racist when it comes to their grading and stuff, and decided to challenge it and bring hearings, et cetera, that evoked a whole bunch of controversy and race and heightened race relations. Around that time, Black Panther movement came around. This was also around the time that there was a chapter of the United Negro Improvement Association coined by the Honorable Marcus Garvey, who was a Back to Africa man, who was a Pan-African. And that was in Montreal. And then you have police brutality happen and the Yonge Street riots happened in 1992. In Toronto, where we resisted against police brutality because of the unfortunate murder of Raymond Lawrence and, Raymond Lawrence in 1992, around the same time as Rodney King, when he was beat over 30 times. And now we are in the present time, 2022, and we're still having to riot. We're still having to protest against police brutality when we have brothers like Andrew Local, who was killed in 2015 and he was mentally ill. When we have people like Regis Korchinski-Paquette, who was killed, we don't know how she fell off of the balcony, but we do know she didn't have a history of suicidal thoughts, and we do know that as soon as the cops came in, all of a sudden she falls off. Now, they don't know what conclusions are, but we know the history, unfortunately, of police relations and black people who are mentally ill. My point is we as black people, we rioted, we protested, we resisted, we said enough is enough. I want to show this timeline. because this is what Black resistance has looked like, and this is what we've been through as a result of racism and why we've resisted. So we'll talk further about
Well,
that.
that is excellent. That's a great overview. That's a tremendous overview.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask this. This may be a little diversion, but I believe it's relevant.
100%.
Now, what does the history then of Canadian Blacks, let's say our resistance to racism oppression,
Yes.
what does it reveal about our forefathers' vision of themselves and for their children?
Excellent. What it reveals, if I can sum it up in, just a few words, is that our forefathers, for the most part, even since the time of enslavement, we understood that our humanity, the importance of our humanity, and our opposition against our humanity being defiled was non-negotiable.
Excellent.
I'm going to say that again. Our forefathers, for the most part, understood that our humanity was nothing to play with. It was non-negotiable for it to be defiled, for it to be degraded, for it to be exploited. And we would defend that in the beautiful words of the Honorable El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X. We would defend that by any means necessary. That's what I understood as our forefathers understand.
So you would say that they saw themselves as a full human being.
Very good.
Worthy of, absolute dignity, respect,
Yes.
honor, and worth.
Yes.
They never saw themselves as their oppressors saw them.
No.
So they were
For the most part.
For the most
Yes.
part. So we
Yes.
could say that vision of themselves really allowed them to resist racism.
Yes.
Even to the point of being willing to sacrifice their lives.
Yes.
I'm saying, would you say that?
100%. We have to understand that in our history of resistance against racism, and I keep wanting to really bring home that word resistance by any means necessary, there has never not been bloodshed. So when you're saying we sacrifice, we understood that, as you said, right from the beginning, that there is no revolution without bloodshed. There is no sacrifice without bloodshed. And bloodshed either comes from our self-sacrifice or, again, in the famous words of Brother Malcolm X, even Stephen. But we understood that blood, unfortunately, would need to be shed for the freedom of our people in whatever respective regard.
So they saw, we could say, equality was non-negotiable.
Very good. Humanity and their humanity.
Their humanity.
Because equality is one thing where you and, the white man or the Chinese man or the Indian man or whomever, we're equal in the sense of we see each other as equal. But we have to understand, we actually didn't start out that way. In a lot of other movements outside of, outside of African people, it was a fight for equality, right? It was a fight for equality. Ours was first a fight for humanity. Then it was a fight for civility. Then it was a fight for equality. And now it's simply a fight for survival. Wow. You see what I mean? So we as Black people have to understand that we didn't start off the same level as other people, even other groups who were colonized. They were not dehumanized by law and in history. We are the only group that was. So our struggle started off at the bottom of the bottom. We had to first prove that we were human beings. And everything else then came after that.
But in hearing you, though, and even just that excellent overview, and of course, that's only a smidgen, of the history of resistance. But in hearing you, what strikes me, can you imagine, David, what compelled them? To me, I see, because I see they must have had a vision of themselves. As you said, they are fully human. Yes. They are human. That wasn't in question.
Yes.
And that the things they're fighting for wasn't so much them fighting for something that they're trying to get.
No.
To me, I think this is what they were.
This is
they
what
added
they deserve.
On the inside.
This is what they deserve. Yeah.
I'm demanding it.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? So to me, this is who I am. I am human. Yes. I am worthy of dignity and respect. I should have equality.
Very good.
And I demand it. You see what I'm saying? And so I just love that. Now, let me there's a statement. I got to say this. I'm going to ask you another question. I remember in grade 12, and I think it was grade 12 history. I'll never forget this because I look back and wondered, why did this older history teacher ask me this, say this? He wrote in my yearbook, a man has nothing to live for at 80 if he has nothing to die for at 30.
Ooh.
That was great. I
powerful.
never forgot that. So so can you so that thought came to me as you were
powerful.
talking, as you were speaking about the passion, the drive, the compulsion our forefathers had. See, they realized, listen, my humanity, the very fact I'm created in the image of God, I bear the image of God, I deserve dignity and respect. I believe that drove them.
Yes.
That they were willing to, can you imagine, to suffer dehumanization,
Yes,
punishment, the whip.
Yes.
Can you imagine that?
Oh, I can scarcely imagine.
And they saw, listen, our children are worthy. They're deserving. Their life, their future demands this resistance.
Yes.
Our resistance.
100%.
So let me ask you this question. Now, so then why this history then that you articulated, though briefly?
Yes.
Why was it sealed? Or concealed, excuse me.
Excellent.
From us. Because most Canadians don't know this history.
No. And some who do refuse to talk about it.
Okay.
So if I again could sum up why they concealed it, is because Canada, for some strange reason, wants to uphold this image that they are the land essentially of milk and honey, and that they almost always want to prove that they are more civilized than their Euro-American counterparts. If there's anything that I've seen throughout history, is that when all else is going wrong in Canada, the go-to statement is, well, at least we're not like the U.S., right? And the irony is the U.S. used to do the same thing and say, well, at least we're not like South Africa, right? This is why Brother Malcolm was so prominent in what he was trying to do, is because he was trying to put the U.S. of A. in the world court to show, no, let's show your true colors, that you are lynching black men, that you are beating down black women and raping black women and denying civil liberties to a greater African diaspora community. You are not the land of the free world. You are not who you say you are. This is what he was doing in the U.S. in the 1950s and 60s, right? What myself, what a lot of other people are trying to do with Canada in 2022 is to say, no, Canada, you are not the land of milk and honey. No, Canada, you have had slavery on this land for over 200 years. No, Canada, you did not have a more modest and more tame slavery. You have people who were willing to die in the name of being free people than to live in bondage. You cannot have that phenomenon. And it wasn't one or two. It was a whole population. You cannot have that and then concurrently call yourself a free and so-called multicultural and kind nation with integrity. So to answer your question, why did they conceal that? They want to uphold this image, a false image as it may be. It's an image that they have to hold on to because for some odd reason, there is this almost psychic pain of trying to come to grips with the truth. And therefore, they'd rather live in a lie than come to the truth. I'll give you an example. Lulu Anderson, the same woman I brought up in 1922. Do you know what they did to her records? And people can look this up. They want to validate what I'm saying. You know what they did to her records? Knowingly, they destroyed her records in the 1970s. Her records from 1921 to 1940. They destroyed it. The Albertan government or whichever officials destroyed it. People can look up Lulu Anderson from Edmonton, Alberta. They can look up what happened to her records.
So the legal records, the court records, all of that.
Gone. A lot of this had to have transmitted through newspaper articles in terms of the controversy. That's how we knew about it. But in terms of even her early life, they say not much is known. They know that maybe she was born maybe in New Jersey, that she came and she spent about 30 or something years in Edmonton, Alberta. That's all we know. But they destroyed the records. Do you know how intentional you have to be
Yeah, to do that.
And what your and what your objective is when you are going to lie and maintain that lie by burning any evidence to refute that lie. And I think it's because of this, proclivity to upholding this delusion that Canada is this beautiful and kind nation of integrity, when we, unfortunately, when we look at the history, that is absolutely false. The indigenous people are trying to prove that on their end. Yeah. We as African people are trying to do that on our end, because there can be no reconciliation. There can be no righting of wrongs if you don't even acknowledge that the wrongs exist in the first place.
Excellent. And when you just said that there must be truth before you can get healing and reconciliation.
Thank you.
That's the order. So a lot of people are trying to pretend, or trying to say you're gonna get a fabricated, false, a fake reconciliation. It's going to be a foundation
100%.
you can't build on, because why? It's built on a lie.
Yes.
And the truth is difficult.
It's very
oftentimes
difficult.
It's really difficult. Sometimes it's nasty, it's dirty, but it's something that has to be put out there.
Yes.
Now, so what about, fast forward a little bit, you did allude to this, I believe, but in your timeline.
Yes.
But the 2020 George Floyd.
Yes, very good.
Let's fast forward there. Internationally, it became known all over the world. Mm-hmm. In large part because of the pandemic. I guess people were more quiet. Mm-hmm. So it got more media attention.
Yes.
So why was that historical event, why was it so significant to Canada? So talk about the significance of that to Canada.
I'll give it to you from a psychological standpoint. Oftentimes, and this is even what happens when it comes to sexual assault. Why after one person comes forward and in admitting that this person was sexually assaulted, a string of people come about, because when they see somebody do it, for one, it psychologically empowers that person to actually believe now that they have the courage and they have the right to do it. Because essentially what has happened as victims is that they have been psychologically manipulated to believe that, for one, no one will believe them, because that's what the perpetrators often tell them. And then for two, nothing will be done about it. And then for three, that there's no point in doing it, because, well, for one, who's going to believe you? And for two, no one's going to see you as the victim. Gotcha. So what that does is it reverses that harm, and it therefore helps to increase their self-worth, to recognize, no, I'm a human being, that this needs to be put out there, right? And then on the other side, sometimes when you see something occur, right, that triggers a traumatic memory of something that occurred with you, that can therefore evoke or elicit an action and evoke intense emotion of you wanting to do something. You may not even know what it is, but you're like, this triggers something from me. I remember something that resembled this, that is evoking a whole bunch of host of emotions. You ask any black person, when they saw George Floyd, black mother, black son, uncles, aunts, grandmothers, grandfathers, some of them may have not even been to the States, but they saw George Floyd and they saw the look in his eyes. They saw the police officer's eyes. And this is what I guess willfully ignorant white people will never understand, is that there is a feeling. I remember a controversial school psychologist, really great, prolific scholar, Dr. Umar Johnson, talked about this, that racism oftentimes is also about a feeling. Only those who have been the victim of it know what that feeling is. If you've been the perpetrator of it, you don't know what that feeling is. And when we looked at that video, it evokes so much emotion, because either you have personally experienced that, or you know somebody who's experienced that on Canadian soil. So what happened with George Floyd is and this, I guess, it goes back to the true colors of the pandemic. It forced everybody to recognize that racism has not gone nowhere, and racism has actually been waiting for you guys to recognize that it's still existing. And what happened is, when people were forced to watch that video circulate the internet, I'm not a fan of Black life, in that degraded fashion being circulated, but I have to give thanks that it was, because it was the first time that people had to say, all right, it's true, it's here, right? It's like the boogeyman. It's like, okay, yeah, the boogeyman's been here, right? And for Black people, even those who were the naysayers, because I saw some who, if you asked them any other day, they would say Black people just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. something's wrong with black people, nothing's wrong with white people. Even them, I saw them putting lengthy posts like, wow, as a black man, this triggered memories of me back in 6th grade being terrorized by the police, or me back in 9th grade getting called the N-word by a teacher. Even the most self-hating black person could not deny the emotion that he evoked. So this is what made George Floyd so significant. And also concurrently, while George Floyd was being murdered, we have to remember George Floyd wasn't the only brother being murdered at that time. In Canada, DeAndre Campbell was shot and murdered the same year. Not even too long after George Floyd was murdered. Regis Korchinski-Paquet was either pushed off or miraculously fell off of a building with police officers just so happened to be there around the same time. This evokes so much emotion because black people, you know what we're saying? When are you going to treat us like human beings? When are you going to realize that we're not going to stop until you realize our humanness, our humanity is non-negotiable, and we're going to protest? This is why Black Lives Matter, actually back in Trayvon Martin in 2014, when Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman, and George Zimmerman got off. This is where Black Lives Matter came about in the States, as well as in Toronto, because we were tired of now you're not even waiting for grown men. It's not like to say that's right or wrong, but you're not even targeting babies. Trayvon Martin was like 13, 14 years old, and he wasn't killed by a cop. But because, unfortunately, there's been a precedent set that you can kill black people and get away with it. And this precedent has been set throughout North America. George Zimmerman gets off, right? My point is that resistance back in 2014, 2015, into 2020 was a part of this history of black people continuously feeling triggered that their humanity is constantly at stake on a daily basis.
Excellent. So it continued to, it's helping to move that pendulum, though slowly.
Yes.
Now, I feel like staying on that thing because can you imagine even with the officer killing the person, killing George Floyd.
Yes.
In everyone's eyes. What was next was, think about this. Even though someone was seen criminally murdering someone, we could say on live television.
Yep.
The next step was not knowing if there would truly be justice. Can you imagine that?
Can you imagine?
So now, I couldn't help. I know that's not part of the discussion.
No,
but it came up as you
real.
said that's part of the resistance.
Yes.
That on every front.
Yes.
There's that fight.
Yes.
Even legally.
Yes.
So then it was not just one thing for the world to see it.
Yes.
But would the system acknowledge it? And in this case, the court system, the legal system.
Very good.
Because we talk about things are systemic.
Very good. And you know what people have to understand, even about when it comes to resistance, yes, one form of resistance is fighting on the front lines, protesting. So you have the Sandy Hudson's, for instance, the Black Lives Matter chapter in Toronto, right? You have the militant sisters like her. You have the Dudley Laws, who created the Black Action Defense Committee, right? You have the militant brothers like that and sisters like that, right? On the front lines. But the militancy or the resistance can also carry forth in our respective realms. When you did your segment on God is Black, that's a form of militancy because you're resisting against the racist notion that God is white. So when you are saying, no, actually, I'm going to teach the real history of what the characters in the Bible actually look like, who they resemble. That's an act of resistance. Because what's that going to elicit? A lot of controversy. That's going to elicit a lot of people saying, wait a minute, Pastor Karl, why is that relevant? Be like, what do you mean why is it relevant? We went into a whole discussion, and you've talked about what has been the result when you've gone against the grain. When you go into education, and we say, hold on, let's give the true history of Canada, or wait, let's talk about these respective events in our education system. That's an act of resistance. Critical race theory. This is what critical race theory is all about. It's simply saying, hey, why don't we talk about the real history of America, the real history of Canada? And the upholders or the defenders of racism are like, we're not doing that. Why? Because that's an act of resistance. In the legal realm, we know what happens there. In the mental health or the psychiatric realm, in the real estate realm, right? Because we know, unfortunately, there was even so many barriers, even throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. You can talk to older generations, older Black generations. There's so much de facto segregation that occurred, even real estate agents have to find ways to resist against racism. So as you said, it transcends simply the frontline, defenses that we see of our activists doing. It transcends into our respective realms where essentially when we are resisting, what we are saying is our humanity and the truth and telling of the truth is non-negotiable by any means necessary.
Now, that's the issue. You just took it out of my mouth.
Yes.
Truth.
Very good.
It's about the truth. We're resisting lies with the truth.
Yes.
We're insisting that the truth prevails.
Very good.
And if you've got the truth, we're going to keep coming with it.
Yes.
Because the lie cannot forever
No.
stand up against the truth.
No. And what I also want to say to even add it to that is what we as Black people, if there's anything that I think we need to understand, and there's been some examples of this throughout history, what we have to understand is not only do we have to make our demands, but, and this is the scary part, we have to not only stand on those demands, but we also have to create ultimatums when those demands are not met. We have to let them know there's going to be consequences in every single revolution in history. It's not simply, okay, can we be independent? It's, we need to be independent. The colonial regime is going to resist and say, well, no, you're not going to be independent. What now is the consequence? So in the education realm, in the legal realm, this is the justice that we demand. No, we're not going to do it. What do we do next, Black people? Same thing on police brutality. And I've said this, and we can call it controversial. I think there may be a time, and it's been said by some other scholars, that there may need to be a cataclysmic clash between the police department and various members of our Black community, because it's been happening way too long. And unfortunately, we as Black community have not provided the real and serious consequences of what will happen if we continue to be blatantly murdered without ramifications. We need to understand that with every demand, there needs to be a consequence. It's simply the natural law. With every consequence, what that looks like, I leave that up to anybody who's deciding those consequences. But what people need to understand with anything is that with any demand that we make in whatever respective fashion against racism, there needs to be a serious ultimatum that we uphold and that we're willing to stand on. And this circles right back to what our forefathers understood, is that we're not going to simply make a demand and then say, well, okay, we're just going to go back and pay our mortgage even if it's not met. We're saying, no, we're not going to work on a plantation. No, my child may lose a father today because this demand needs to be met by any means necessary.
And again, the spirit of that, though, David, again, is you can tell what something means to you by the price you're willing to pay. That's what, economics is about. That.
Very good.
Now, we need to get into this as time as we're moving on. How then, I think you've already touched on this, how do we teach and reinforce the importance of this this resistance to racism to our children?
Excellent. It goes right back, and this is what I love about our the way our program has been set up. It goes right back to when we talked about the beauty of being Black and what it takes to fight against self-hatred. What we need to instill in our children is that not only are they beautiful in being Black, that's good, and beautiful in being African, we need to teach them that anybody who tells you otherwise is wrong. And that you need to let them know that it's wrong. And that if they continue to violate you in that sense, there needs to be consequences. What those consequences look like is going to vary within the families. But what you have to what we have to teach our children is that when they come home and they say, so-and-so made fun of my hair, what do? You have to teach that child not to let that go. This is unfortunately some of the challenges that some of our parents do. Because again, this is why I say for the most part our forefathers did this, but some of our forefathers and mothers did, is because they were so dejected, because they experienced the self-hatred. They said, well, just keep going, baby. Just keep going. They were about survival.
Survival. That's the key word.
But what we have to teach our children is thrival. As I would say, we teach them to thrive. That if they come home, we're not going to let them sit in that dejection. We're going to say, no. We're going to remind them not only that they're beautiful, but we're going to say, I'm going to march with you to let these teachers know, to let this family know that this is not okay, and that if this continues, A, B, and C consequence will occur. That from the beginning, that the child is 3, 4, 5. This is what I teach my children, right? My children are 4 and 1. And my son, he already knows that Africa is his home, right? That he is African first, that he is a black child and black is beautiful. He knows his hair is beautiful. My daughter smiles. She's confident in who she is. Why? Because me and my wife and anybody around, because we have to understand it takes a village.
Takes a village, yeah.
So you cannot go and place your kids with people who are going to deject them and say, black's actually not that great. No, you need to keep your kids away from those dejected people until they're healed. We have to, as a village, as a community, and rebuilding the black family, to teach our children from the very young age through literature, through constant verbal reassurance, through physical affection.
Excellent, yeah.
That they are beautiful.
That's beautiful.
And they need to understand no one can violate that without consequences.
That gets into my. I think you've kind of overlapped into my last question.
Yeah.
So, but even if you have to repeat it, I think it's
That's
important. Let's do some closing words on the primary motivation. Again, going back to this primary motivation that we have for resistance to racism, and we could say, what is the end goal?
Excellent.
I thought about asking, let's discuss that a little
Very
bit.
good. So the primary resistance, the end goal of resistance against racism.
In a brief way.
In a brief way, yeah. I'll be as brief as possible. Is that we as black people want to be able to function in a society where people may not like us per se, but they can respect our humanity.
That's excellent.
And that we are able to navigate a world where we are able to be just as self-sufficient, just as productive, and function just as smoothly, free of dehumanization. We can have disagreements, we can have conflicts. Matter of fact, you can even have prejudice. But we can respect each other as human beings, where you are not going to do something that is going to so blatantly, unscrupulously violate my humanity to the point now where I have to come out of my humanity to retaliate in whatever fashion. This is what I believe the primary motivation of resistance against racism is about. This is how I've understood
That's
it,
excellent.
and this is what I express to anybody.
That's beautiful. So that every person, and we're talking about the black family, the
Yes.
black nation,
Yes.
worthy of dignity,
Yes.
respect,
Yes.
honor,
Yes.
to be treated with equality,
Yes.
to be able to go for the very best.
Yes.
Man, this is good stuff.
Very good.
We're going to conclude today. As we close, and thank you so much again for being with us on another episode of Rebuilding the Black Family with David Grant and myself. The more we think right about ourselves, and I'm just blessed by just some of the thoughts that David communicated today, but but it inspires in me this thought that the more we think right about ourselves and about one another, the more we seek the highest and the best, not just for ourselves, but for one another.
Excellent.
And the more then, that means then, the more we will fight then against racism, oppression, right? And the more we will tangibly show our belief in equality and goodwill for one another.
Excellent.
We're demanding this.
Yes.
We're demanding the very best.
Yes.
I mean, what else is there?
Excellent.
If not, then we're succeeding. We're really saying we're accepting a lower level, second-rate status.
Very
No,
good.
we're not doing that. So the more we fight against racism, the more we will transform the landscape to truly reflect
Yes.
one humanity. Really, transform our landscape to be one of more humility, mercy, and justice.
Yes.
So,
Excellent.
again, thank you for joining us on Rebuilding the Black Family. I trust you've been helped, inspired, and informed. Join us next time for Rebuilding the Black Family.